Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're doing the Rinoa character review. Brand new free unit handed out to the global fan base this week as part of the Final Fantasy VIII collaboration. A lot of people have been looking forward to her, so let's dive in. Today's character review, pretty standard from the character overview, base and total stat analysis, looking at some other metrics. We'll lead up to the report card where we can kind of grade those attributes in the context of the rest of her kit. I'll give some general thoughts just to kind of highlight some of the rationale for why I think the way I do, and then we'll look a little bit at some heal calculations live, just to kind of emphasize some certain points. We'll look at the passives, the counters, the job abilities, auto priority cast times, the TMR review, job-based vision card eligibility, and Esper Synergies and weapon optimizations. So, kicking things off here, brand new Earth unit added to Global. Galzak attempted to kind of fill that void, but honestly didn't really hit the mark. Now for the job perspective here, they gave her the unique main job of Princess of the Resistance with the Grimoire Keeper and Red Mage as the other sub-jobs. She equips gloves, hats, cloths, and accessories with a move 3, jump of 1 as a 90 cost unit. And yes, her faith recommendation is absolutely, no questions asked, 97 faith. Now looking at her job here, max range of 5 squares away offensively. She does have 1 AoE ability on the main job and 2 unit scaling ones on the main job as well. From a resistance standpoint, the only strength here is 10% to magic. The rest of them are actually not all that great. 5% to slash and missile, minus 10% to both pierce and strike. It's honestly been a while since we've seen double-digit negatives on a character for resistances here. And then from an ailment perspective, because she is someone who's 97 faith, you should be cognizant of what you can be afflicted by, and it's 50% to paralysis, which is kind of nice given the uptick in Alaya recently, who does have some paralyze. I know Skahal kind of does too, which her element is meant to counter them, and that helps doing so. 50% to Toad and 10% to slow, which is also nice. We've seen a little bit of extra slow uptick in the game overall. Now for the mastery ability, they gave her a decrease of activation skill time on both support abilities and offensive abilities. They also gave her 15% lightning res, which again is going to be kind of a theme here for where I end up on my character grade for her, where she does do very well encountering many of the lightning element units. She should. She's an earth unit, but this really drives it home to make it that much easier. The dream ability, they gave her 10% extra magic, which she needs, and honestly, I don't think it was quite enough. But regardless, 15 AoE res as well to round out the 140. Now, we look at the base stats overall. Again, most supports skew much lower on the HP side of things. She is no exception. She's very, very low here on base HP overall. The base magic stat that we'll look at is also kind of irregularly low. This is kind of a theme that we also saw with Shal's, who was just released a couple weeks ago as one of the new support units, and Rinoa was kind of similar in that regard, which is ironic given that Rinoa is a 90 cost unit, Shal's is 70 cost. I'm getting ahead of myself, but base magic is not in a very good spot where it used to be that supports were very high on the base magic. Now the agility base-wise is middle to the below end of things. We know this is not the final end of the story though, but we'll circle back on agility, talk about it more comprehensively soon. The dexterity stat also very much below average here, not a crit hit unit in the least, and luck is basically average, nothing exceptional. So overall, base stats are kind of in my opinion, but again, she's a support unit, so that's not terribly surprising. It really matters at the end of the day how good the abilities are in their kit, how well do they do their job. And so when you transform those 5 charts into one, just to kind of compare them to the UR averages here, her base stats, again, relatively lackluster overall against all 5 of those major categories. When you include the board nodes, the master ability, not a whole lot of changes, quite honestly. It's roughly equivalent. And if you're looking at the sources of many of these stats, you know, that 9 agility is fair. That's kind of average nowadays for what they give out, a little bit on the lower end. The luck of 47 does make this unit step back a little bit in total luck. They emphasize her magic a little bit here in terms of giving her some of the board nodes and some of the mastery, but from what I can tell, her ending magic value isn't terribly spectacular unless you end up going the job vision card route where there's more magic boosting things for her. So yes, that perspective you can get a higher magic stat, but we'll look in the heal calculations. Her overall magic stat in most mono earth themes is kind of whatever. Now for the agility, and I'm adding a new way to look at this. Now she has no agility boosting passives. She's roughly at that 77 agility, and when you compare it to characters that can equip passives, she does kind of fall a step behind in that regard. Now one of the things that's always been a little bit of a flaw with this chart is that although it shows where she's on the gradient, it doesn't really do much to really show like how many characters there are in that group, which I think is more important for agility than some of the other metrics, and hopefully this will make sense in a second. But if we're looking and grouping how many characters are at a certain level of agility, and I have them here in units of 2. meaning this is how many units are in that agility range. Figure this is a little more helpful in determining like how average or exceptional they might be. And Rinoa is just a step below here for where most units end up for their base agility. And this is again including 15% and 8% vision cards that scale off the base agility. So nothing terrible there, but then when you do include characters that typically can include passives, she is on the lower side of this bar chart, if you will, in terms of where most characters end up when applying these VCs. And she is a haste-oriented unit, so this is a little bit misleading. I remember I had this point when Velas came out as well. But I think it's overall noteworthy that her turn order isn't anything exceptional just from an innate agility perspective. Now for the crit hit and crit avoid, we saw very low on the dexterity stat. She is not a crit hit unit in the least. And even crit avoidance, by kind of jipping her a little bit on that crit evade, she does end up relatively below average here. And many of these supports lately with some of the Mastery 2s, 140 upgrades, passive abilities have gotten extra emphases to crit evasion, and she's not one of those units. This is definitely kind of a regular for a support unit to be this low on the crit avoidance overall. Now for the accuracy, absolutely like trashed here of accuracy. She is not accurate in the least, 151% here. No passives to boost her accuracy as well. She does have a fairly reliable guarantee hit on the main job, and we'll talk about that soon. It's a select 2, so it's a really good thing. She'll have no problem hitting evade that don't have nullify sure hit, but her overall accuracy is very bad. It's actually so bad that she could actually miss like B and C tier evade units just regularly in the battlefield. So that's not a good thing if that happens. We'll talk more about that soon. The evasion, also one of the worst evade units in the game. There is no evasion potential whatsoever. I'm going to talk more about this on the report card on why I think this is kind of a big miss for her. Now, as we get to the report card, again, it's a little bit different because supports naturally skew much lower on many of these stats because they are more ability oriented, but we'll go through the rigmarole as usual. The effective HP, I'm going with a C here. This is similar to Shal's. No defense, 8 spirit innately. She does get 12 defense on her main passive though, so more often than not, you'll start off at 12 and 8 respectively. She does have 25 AoE res innately, 15 truly innately, and 10 from a passive ability that you'll likely have on all the time. So 25 base for all intents and purposes. No unit resistance though. And when we look at survivability, I'm actually going with an F here. This is kind of crazy to me that they released a unit like this. There is no survivability tools whatsoever in her kit other than an auto cure counter ability and her ability to heal herself in her select 2. She does have a hate down on her main buff, but where we've seen the game lately with some of the select 2 abilities, hate down is not nearly what it used to be. There is a barrier on the Grimoire sub-job, but not recommended just given how much barrier break there is, what it means for messing up her main job turn rotation. We'll talk about that more later, but overall survivability is very, very poor. Now the damage, I'm going with a C+ here. She has a decent enough magic stat. It's average in my opinion. She has 80 spirit penetration potentially after her limit break. So she's got 40 innately with a passive that you can equip. So 50 with a Trust Stone passive. There's no magic res pen though at all in her kit. She does have a 30% Earth Imperil though. So that is a nice way to amplify her own damage. So overall damage is maybe just a step back from what I would have liked to have seen it, but there's no doubt she'll definitely catch a lot of people off guard, where right now we're in a very physical heavy meta that she will nuke a couple people if they're not prepared for it. But when we talk like total game balance, total math, total magic casters, about a C+. Now for agility, going with a C- here, and again, big asterisk. Her base innate agility is 77. That's the same as the UR average. When you equip passives, she does fall behind in that regard, but because she self-hastes herself, this does change things significantly for what actually ends up happening for overall turn order. But again, there's a lot of haste removal in the game at the moment too, so kind of hit or miss depending upon how that ends up turning out. Now accuracy, going with an F here, horrendous accuracy. Her select 2 is a guaranteed hit though, so that's definitely a nice thing for her to have in her back pocket. The evasion, I'm going with an F here, no evasion at all. This is where I think it's the biggest miss on this character. I would have loved to see them emphasize a little more luck in her kit, base luck and total luck, for 2 reasons. Number 1, the crit avoidance, as we saw earlier, I think is really important to maybe helping a little bit of her survivability, where she's got really no tools at all from a survivability perspective. So yes, having some extra crit evade is a nice way to mitigate damage, but I would have loved for her to potentially maybe dodge a hit or 2. Nothing crazy, but if you think back to Halloween Leela back in the early days, maybe not to that degree, but when you consider Earth is an evade heavy element, for her to potentially be able to dodge some attacks as her survivability, I think is a really cool thing as a support that we have not seen in quite some time. And obviously that's not really broken because there's a ton of very accurate units, 100% hit chance units that I don't think this would break Rinoa's build if they ended up giving her a lot of luck to maybe make her somewhat of an evade unit, but she's so low that even in an Earth team, this is not an evade unit in the least. So big F on that in my opinion. Now movement, going with a D here, there are no movement capabilities at all. There's no jump one, no move one, nothing of that sort. The auto ease of use, I am going with a C- here. And I say this because likely for many, average players, a hard balance between her sustain and healing and her offensive capability with buff toggles and AI priority. There's some things that I'm like, that could go very wrong if not used properly, and we'll talk about that soon, obviously. The game disruption, though, I am going with a B-, if not a little bit higher, because right now in the moment, great current meta unit against Elia. She does do a lot of really great things for Earth against Elia. There is no doubt 100% that that's true. She is a free unit handed out, so most people have access to her. So you definitely will see likely an uptick in the short term in her usage. So yeah, game disruption is actually pretty decent for those reasons. But as we look at the kit, the passive abilities, you're going with a B, great main passive, some versatility with the others, but not a ton, but overall decent enough passives. The counters, I'm going with a C. They are good counters. They're very average, though. Nothing special about them whatsoever. The overall job and kit, I'm going with a B+. Now, it's nice to add another Velis-like support to the game. She does do that job, maybe just a smidge too late in my opinion, in terms of like timing. But they've done a lot of really unique and creative things for her offensively that do kind of mirror what Velis does in terms of an apparel access, some status effect access, really strong heals, agility buffs, AP restore to teammates. Overall, it's pretty solid. But the final grade I'm going with is a C+. Now, in my opinion, not a great lasting unit. The glove choice for weapon is good, though, where glove is a great magic choice to slot into a couple different teams. There is some major stat deficiencies here, though, that I think prevent her from being a great support. And I think the things she does for her team are just a little bit too late here. And again, just kind of recapping, like, haste is obviously really great, but there's like 4 or 5 TMRs nowadays that give haste. That's already pretty prevalent in the game, and correspondingly, there's a bunch of haste removal in the game. So it's not like it used to be where you would get hasted and then the game was just over if you didn't match that. There is a fair amount of counterplay to it. And then you talk about the AP restore. Well, a lot of these post 3rd anniversary units are exceptionally self-sufficient already with their AP levels. This isn't really a big value add for more of the modern units. It's certainly nice, but I don't think it's game-breaking like it used to. The agility buff percent, though, is certainly nice. That one still has shown that it's still very valuable in maintaining some turn order upkeep, particularly when you look at someone against, again, we keep referring to her, but Elia with her, like, CT down everybody. Having that agility boost is certainly helpful, which is why Rinoa is great for helping to counter that. But outside of that, I don't love what she actually offers for the broad balance of the game. And just kind of recapping in some of the general thoughts, she is grossly fragile for support post 3rd anniversary. She has 25 AoE res innately. She will get another 25 on her buff. That's her haste ability, and that's certainly nice. 50 AoE res, not including vision cards, definitely a good thing. But there's no unit res innately, no protect and shell, no courage or re-raise, no chain res or debuff weakening. There's no heal back mechanic to say, like, you do damage and absorb 20% of it. That's non-existent. There's no barrier. There is on the Grimoire subjob, but it's really not something that fits into her turn rotation. And as you saw, she has 2 negative 10% resistance weaknesses here, which is very absurd given what we've seen lately. So exceptionally fragile overall in my opinion. That's not a good thing as the future of the game goes on. There's also a delicate balance in her offensive potential. The limit break has a range of 6 squares away. And so when you talk about properly getting off some haste, some teammates early, maybe using her own buff on herself, which is talk about in a second, 6 squares away for a limit break that's offensive oriented might bait her earlier than you want her to. And then the accuracy that we saw is horrendous. Well, she has a great AoE ability that is a 30% Earth Imperil that has stun on it as well. But if you're grossly inaccurate with her, she's going to miss even units she shouldn't be missing. So that's not a great thing either. Just a random fun fact, because it's called Quake, it doesn't affect characters with float. And Soul, that's coming out soon, actually does have a passive that gives him float. I thought that was really interesting that in such a short time span, they released 2 characters that actually did something with the float mechanic. That's irregular. But the Powers of Fantasy buff that we'll talk about soon is a huge buff and a big buff difference for her kit overall. It's hard to balance the AI with the buff rotation and that, and making sure that you can always get that off. But I do think a lot of people may struggle with this, and we'll talk more about it soon too. Now, I do think she's a great addition to the cast of glove units. Those will scale well for future rainbow usage, where those vision cards are pretty much out there for glove to kind of fit into a variety of different teams. There's a lot of magic scaling ones too. That's very good for her. It will decrease the value of that Earth Imperil on the ability, though, where if you're in a rainbow type team or she's in a mono element team, not everyone gets the same benefit from that Earth Imperil. Now, I do, as I mentioned, I think there's an overabundance of haste and haste dispel that, relatively speaking, it's just not as OP as it once was. So this is a good thing to add. Not game breaking at this stage, though. I don't think there's any PvE upside, though, which is also kind of a glass half full way to look at some of these characters that kind of underwhelm. And I do think, though, they've done a good job giving her a disgustingly good heal modifier on the main ability, which we're going to talk about right now with some heal calculations. So for the healing simulation, I've got this heal calculator. I'll try to post it in the comments, but I put this out there back when I did my healing video, and I did a really basic, and I want to just like talk through some numbers here to talk about how good the modifier on this healing ability is. I made a really casual build here of Rinoa, Dialdo, and King Bradley. I put in, mono Earth Vision cards that I thought were suitable for them, really trying to emphasize Rinoa, a little bit of her magic stat. I used the Bahamut Esper here. I did put on Trust Stones as well, and her magic stat ends up at 1435. If you throw the Remu vision card in the sub slot here for the magic percent, gets her up into the 1500s. A little bit of a difference, but not immense. But the idea being her base heal is about 1400. The double recover, which we'll talk about soon, is that select 2 ability that she can heal 2 people at once for a modifier of 310%. That is exceptionally, that is like limit break levels of healing capability. And when we talk about healing power up or down, she has none innately unless you equip a passive, but for now we'll assume you don't. That passive gives 20 healing power, by the way. But if we assume at minimum Rinoa will always have healing power 10 on a Trust Stone passive, let's say the person she's healing, like Dialdo, will also have that healing power 10. We'll assume that that's 20 right there. Without going crazy and further healing power just quite yet, the last part of this equation is the faith modifier. Now, Dialdo is normally a 97 faith tank. You're talking about 10,300 healing like that. Well, maybe not exactly. It does have a cast time. It's not instant. But 10,000 healing is exceptionally strong. And if you were to consider that you were to add in that extra 20 healing power from the passive, yeah, you're talking 12k healing on this ability. That is very, very strong. And even for 50 faith units, if we go back to that 20 healing power, 7,800 healing is certainly nice. That's a sizable amount of healing. And just 2 other things to look at here. Her secondary AoE heal is this Reinvigorate, is a Kiraga level heal at 210, a little bit lower. This is kind of where you get back to those more pedestrian levels of healing overall. If you consider Dialdo back at that 97 faith, you're looking at 7,000 healing overall. If you add in that healing passive to give her another 28,000 on Reinvigorate, AoE to allies is certainly still sizable. The Cura, which is her red mage sub, though, is equivalent to Reactive Heal, which is one of her counter abilities. It's only that 110 modifier. This is a little bit lower, obviously, but if you consider that, let's say Rinoa is healing herself on the reactive heal, if we'll focus on that one, she'll technically be counter healing herself for 4,000 HP. That's fair. It's most likely the difference between dying on your next hit, I would say. So it does the job, but I think a lot of supports and magic units have at least similar stats here in metrics, so that's not game breaking. And even if you were to include the self-healing passive for that 20 healing power, just throwing it in here, she would self-heal herself for 5,300. So again, that's pretty sizable. I just wanted to run through this generally speaking, though, from a magic stat perspective and a healing power perspective and a faith, just to give the idea of just how good that this double recover ability is with that 310 modifier, like how vastly good that is, and how the rest of these are fine. They're not game breaking as double recover is. But now getting back to it, let's actually dive into the job and kit, and we'll see some of those abilities pop back up here. Now, Undesired Power is the best ability on her passives. It's magic buff of 24%. It's a reduction in cast time of 200 for both types of casts, and that AoE res of 15. That's a permanent equip, in my opinion. The second one is obviously a little more up to debate. I mentioned there's that healing power of 20, but I think I prefer Clandestine Reading here, where you get that extra 12 defense. The Spear Pen of 40 is really a big one, though, because often enough, be attacking. She's not a pure pocket healer like some units are, and so you do want to lean a little bit into that offensive capability to make sure that she's actually contributing meaningfully. So me personally, I'm probably going for these top 2. The rest of these, Red Mage Lore is fair. I don't think that magic damage offsets the lack of spear penetration. The Grimoire Keeper Mastery is fair. These statistically aren't her strong points, so that's not a big stat buff. At Mages of Protection, kind of niche for that meta, but really the top two are where you want to end up in. And when we look at the counter abilities next, I actually like all three of these. They're all very average, though. There's nothing wrong with that. We saw Reactive Heal just a second ago. That's a pretty mundane counter. Lots of characters have this. The Magic Reflex is certainly nice, but again, both of these are 20% chance to proc, so we've seen how much reaction block rate. This isn't as, effective as it might have once been. And the Hidden Resistance, though, is certainly nice, adding that -1 hate. It's at AoE res of 40. But there's, again, a handful of units that have this. None of these are really exceptional. They're all fine. They're okay counters. I'd probably do Reactive Heal just to make sure that she lives an extra turn, potentially. Now, for the main job buffs, this is where you get all that support. I'm going to talk about these in reverse order from bottom to top, because that's her AI priority. Time Accelerant is the first ability she prioritizes. That's that haste for an ally and herself. It's also AoE res of 25 for herself and that ally, and a decreased chance of being targeted of 5. That's absolutely nice. It's only 3 casts, similar to Velas, so you got to be smart with how it ends up getting used. The Double Recover, this next ability, though, is exceptionally good. Select 2 targets, restore HP of 310%. It's also that 25% agility boost. There's one massive problem with this, though. I need a second. Gumi is not fixed as AI. There's a big problem with healing in this game. It's not a problem. Or more specifically with Rinoa, it's a big problem. There's a threshold that every healer looks at, that when a character falls below that threshold, a percent of their total HP, that's when the healing AI will know they're low, I need to heal them. The problem with this ability is, let's say Rinoa is standing next to 2 teammates. Let's say Bradley takes a ton of damage, Dialdo only takes a little bit of damage. Well, when she goes to select both, potentially to heal them up, because Bradley's below the threshold, she'll heal him. But if Dialdo's not below the threshold, she won't use that second cast of healing, which is stupidly bad. You have a free cast of healing to select a second target, and she won't do it. That's a major flaw in this ability that hasn't been rectified. I need to just point that out. But the third buff here is really a game changer for Rinoa, where it's a decrease of both kinds of skill activation time of 400. It's a 20% magic buff for her. That's very strong. And it nullifies 3 status ailments. Berserk being a very noteworthy one, just because we're seeing that more of an uptick as of late. Overall, this main job, though, does offer some great support options. I love this Powers of Fantasy buff, and which is why I think there's some difficulty in using her potentially, where if you're not managing your AI right with these 2 haste abilities before enemies start getting in range, you can't use the second buff. That's a different kind of Rinoa if you can't use this buff. We'll talk about why in the cast time. Now, for the main job offensive abilities, Maddening Magic is an insta-cast ability. 15 AP, it's a chance to inflict confusion. 3 squares away, certainly nice. The Twin Strike is another good ability here. This is 5 squares away in any direction. That's select 2 targets. It's a guaranteed hit, 220% modifier. Definitely a very impactful one. There is a cast time associated with this one, though. And then Quake is that third ability. That's our AoE, another 5 square range. Cast time of 200, so it's a slower cast, lower modifier of 185%, but it's a 30% Earth in Peril and a 25% chance to inflict stun. This is honestly a very, very good ability, but again, her accuracy being as bad as it is, you cannot be missing this ability on people, because these effects of the Imperil and the stun only apply after you've actually hit them. It's not pre-damage, post-damage, so you have to hit. So overall, on paper, this is actually like a pretty decent offensive loadout for Rinoa. But again, you have to keep in mind that all these are maximum 5 squares away, which is why when I talk about the limit break being a large diamond here, this is a range of 6 squares away. So my fear, theoretically, is that you'd have a battle, Rinoa would haste herself and a teammate, someone would walk in a range before 6 squares away. She'd use this limit break on them, which is good for her offense. That's cool. But then you lose out that buff that I was just emphasizing a second ago, or potentially a TMR use, or potentially a second cast of a haste on another teammate nearby. And it's typeless damage. That's a good thing and a bad thing. You can bypass a lot of element resistances with this. And so I think people are going to struggle with this toggle a little bit. But when we look at this sub-job here, Princess of the Resistance, this is a must-equip in my opinion the rest of the time. This is another curative ability. This is an AoE one. That's also the Restore AP of 10. This is a budget version of Velas, though, because again, it's only a small cross-shaped AoE, not a big diamond. So although it's nice that you can technically heal multiple people, it's inferior to Velas's, and although I like it a lot, and I think it's a major part of her healing, because again, if you look back on the main job, that heal ability has 4 casts that you might likely potentially maybe need more of it. I like the fact that she has access to another one, because there's No other reliable healing in the kit at range. Now the Sorceress Dispel, though, I also do like this one because if you consider, again, kind of come back here a second, the Select 2 ability only has 3 usages, so should she run out of usages and can't hit a unit later, this is a very seriously good Dispel that also dispels Courage. That's the big thing here. So overall, I think it's a really unique thing to throw into the sub job. I don't think it's going to get a ton of use, unfortunately, because she's got those 2 guaranteed hits that she'll likely prioritize doing anything else other than using this, but at least for manual, it's also a very good ability, obviously. Now, for the cast times, this is what I want to talk about here. The Mastery ability gives her 200. Her main passive gives her another 200. That's a total cast time reduction of 400 on all abilities innately. So essentially, once the cast time bar fills up to past 600, that's when these skills will go off. Her 2 curative abilities we just talked about both have a cast time of 320. So it means, just innately, they will go off 2 ticks after cast. And her 2 offensive abilities that do have cast time, they're much slower casts. They'll go off at the 3rd tick of cast time. This, again, considering the matchup against Alaya, which Rinoa will popularly be brought to, is very slow and very bad because Alaya, on her stag impact, can cancel casts of spells. So if Rinoa was too slow casting this, that spell will just get flat out canceled. And which is why that second buff that I was mentioning, that 400 cast time down, is game changing for Rinoa. All of these abilities become near instacast. Now, I will say, if you wanted to do a Truststone cast time down and an Esper cast time down, the offensive abilities here would still end up being 1 tick, so you can go that route rather than the buff. But the curative abilities don't get affected by Espers and Truststone, so they would remain at 2 ticks. The bottom line is, this is an important buff to get off. That's why I was trying to emphasize it. That's a huge acceleration of her cast time by doing so. Now for the sub-jobs, Grimoire Keeper, again, I don't love these sub-jobs. The curative potential on this Archaic Healing still does technically have a cast time, but you need to be adjacent to your allies, so I don't like it for that reason. The other abilities here, I don't really think there's anything that adds to it other than maybe switching up the buffs a little bit, but even then, her buff priority really theoretically should be the haste. Attritional Protection does give her Protect, which I said she doesn't have any innately, but that's because I don't think you're ever going to really be using this. And the same thing for the Barrier. I don't think it's a smart use of her AI. Maybe niche in some matchup situations, but not for 95% of the time. And the Red Mage sub-job, it's slightly different than Dialdo's. I actually think it's worse, where his is that resistance break. It does pair well together, obviously, where he can Spirit Imperil, remove erase, but I'm worried about her accuracy for jamming thrust here and the range of this ability, and kind of like the limit break conversation, using it too early. But as we get to the TMR review finally, this actually is a very good TMR. This is a great accessory, 2 casts, defensive 20, unit res of 25. I just wish it was for self and ally. It's nice that she can cast it on someone, but to not be able to cast it on yourself is kind of an L. The magic of 40% is a fair buff, but overall, it's a nice chess piece to throw into what TMRs offer for movement, given that it's a 3 range ability to move towards someone. I could see some people using this in some situations. Now for the job-based vision cards. Apologies, I know I block out the top right of this. This is the Addison vision card that I'm blocking out on the top right. Glove is in a really good spot for job-based vision cards. They have a great area res one that has magic % on it, so that will help Rinoa a lot. They have an agility card here with the Zoma vision card. The Addison vision card is very good. As mentioned, Rinoa has no magic res pen in her kit, so this is a nice value add in addition to the extra magic % and the reaction block, which, if you recall, Rinoa's got no reaction block at all in the kit. Again, very bad considering the current meta and outlook of the game, the power creep and whatnot. Technically, she also fits into the area res of the new Alaya vision card. This one's okay. I think it's inferior to the other one, for her at least. But she can at least zero out her strike res if you put the Grom's vision card here in the sub slot for that strike res to kind of offset the minus 10%. But again, the bottom line is Gloves is really, really strong for what it offers for potential resistances across a variety of metas for enemy types. There's some magic boosting things. It's got some of the critical components you want for area res. It is missing the unit res at the moment, but that's okay. Overall, pretty good class for her. Now let's look at the Esper Synergies. Really want to prioritize the magic % so it can both help her offensive and curative potential. The rest is matchup specific because, again, she's relatively squishy that you do want to emphasize not dying quickly. But after that, look at some modifiers and then theoretically look at some agility or like faster Espers because, again, she has no way to really tune her agility in the kit other than the haste. And in terms of recommendations, I actually really like Dark Golem here where you get that 5% human res, you get some magic % nodes, get some defense. Overall, I think it's a good bulk Esper. It is a little on the slower side, but again, if she's hasting herself, probably not a problem. After that, I actually do like the other Earth Espers too. I think Sheraton for that AoE res, some of the magic attack. I also think the Lick King, or whatever you want to call him, is pretty good for the defense, and there's also strike res on his board as well, so really smart Earth Espers to play with, but I do think Bahamut is kind of a good default. He also has that strike res. There's magic percent, there's human killer, there's agility, all the way down the middle. Bahamut gets everything. That's kind of the de facto number one in my opinion, with that Dark Golem being a really smart second one. But other than that, I do think some like X Factor ones are Dark Siren, who has some of that reaction block, which Rinoa's got none of, and also has the debuff weakening, which is really smart. Got some unit res, which Rinoa has none of, and theoretically can get to positive 5% lightning res if you go on those notes. So Dark Siren's a good X Factor, and the Demon Lord, or the Demon Lord's a decent one too, where it's got that strike res, got some magic percent, it's got some unit res on it. There's a lot of things that overlap with them on the bottom here that I like. So overall, there are some decent options to pick from, but a little bit limiting overall. I don't really think the cast time down on any of the Espers that are available, like Valfor or Siren, really optimal at this time. So I'm kind of sticking with these. For the weapon optimization now the Shooting Star free weapon I gave out is a really, really awesome... I'm kidding. This weapon's very bad. This is like a really weird weapon in my opinion. The only good thing about this weapon is the fact that healing power 15 has 5% extra than the Trust Stone passive, and you might be able to fit in an extra modifier in your Trust Stone passives for her. So a little extra 10 mod. That's kind of underwhelming. So I'm probably passing on this, quite honestly. I do like the Ladies Kafkaz though. That's the Revelka TMR. I do like this for the min-maxing of the magic potential with Trust Stones overall. I like the extra 15 Spirit Pen for what it gives for her damage uptime, that you're not 100% relying on the limit break to kind of get to those higher levels. This is a really good one. I do like Elven Gloves though, primarily in my opinion, and you probably saw this in my sample build earlier. You get that 20 Spirit Pen, the 10 magic attack, 194 magic. I think this is superior to most of the other options, but Dark Gloves is a good honorable mention here, where if you consider she's got that 30% Earth Imperil, there's a decent chance that, again, people not gearing for magic might hit their damage cap, and so getting a free 1,000 max damage without having to do a Trust Stone passive is really good. The magic of 214 and the magic attacks certainly go nice as well. I know when I was using Addison, the Dark Gloves was kind of a de facto choice for a long time. I think it's the same concept here. But finally, honorable mention, the Trials of Reckoning item. This is not nearly as impactful for Rinoa as it was for Squall. But for Rinoa, she gets that 10% slash and strike res. So doesn't everyone, though. That's not unique to her. The magic attack of 15, again, very paltry modifier increase. That's whatever. The magic debuff res of 100, it's okay. If you consider that the way that works is that she'll never be able to have her magic decreased, given her fair base magic, it means that if someone had a 40% magic reduction, you'd basically be saving 140 of her magic stat. And again, we're talking about the modifier of that main heal ability. Like, I don't think 140 magic is a huge game changer for the healing. Maybe for the offensive capability, but again, I don't know. This is not a major must for her. But that's the Rinoa character review in a nutshell. Again, I think she's a excellent character for what we're seeing for the foreseeable meta with Bridal Alaya. There's the new Astrius unit. That's a new lightning unit that was also announced. She does very, very good things for Dialdo and Bradley, and is a core piece of making the engine run in that mono Earth team. Definitely an upgrade over Queen Mashari in many regards, in my opinion. She not only does some of the similar things from the Imperil standpoint, but does a lot of extra things for the heal, the haste. Means your Bradley doesn't have to use a TMR to haste himself. He gets it from her instead. Means Dialdo has a constant source of external healing. He's going to be incredibly hard to take down. So Rinoa is exceptionally good for that, and you'll likely get a lot of good usage out of her. But as the game goes on, the broad scheme of the supports, I think she's a step back and probably won't live to have that same window that others probably do in the broad scheme of the game. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all soon.